Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia. You can join our conversation by calling toll-free in the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-655-2121, or by Skype at ORN Live, or for the terminally timid, you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com or post a message on Truth and Lies Radio Show Facebook page. Don't forget that Overseas Radio Network's archives are available on overseasradio.com 24/7, so you can listen to the show whenever it's convenient for you. According to the big clock, on truthandradio.com's FATCA, Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act page, your worldwide financial privacy will expire if you're a U.S. citizen in 209 days, 13 hours, 50 minutes, and 9 seconds. Well, I've got to say that I am proud of the sovereign state of Alabama, one of the 5 sisters that helped form the Confederacy. In fact, the provisional capital of the Confederacy was in Montgomery. There's a great story about that, in fact, which I may tell you before the show's over. Alabama has become the first state to adopt a tough law protecting private property and due process by prohibiting any government involvement with or participation in a controversial United Nations scheme known as Agenda 21. Activists from across the political spectrum celebrated the measure's approval as a significant victory against the UN's sustainability plot, expressing hopes that similar sovereignty-preserving measures would be adopted in other states as the nationwide battle heats up. The Alabama Senate bill, SB 477, known unofficially among some supporters as the due process for property rights, was approved unanimously by both the state House and Senate. After hesitating for a few days, Republican Governor Robert Bentley finally signed into law the widely popular measure, but only after heavy pressure from activists forced his hand. Virtually no mention of the law was made in the establishment press. Gee, that's not surprising. But analysts said the measure was likely the strongest protection against the U.S. plot passed anywhere in the United States thus far. The law aimed at protecting private property rights specifically prevents all state agencies and local governments in Alabama from participating in the global scheme in any way. The state of Alabama and all political subdivisions may not adopt or implement policy recommendations that deliberately or inadvertently infringe or restrict private property rights without due process, as may be required by policy recommendations originating in or traceable to Agenda 21, says the law, adding a brief background on the UN plan which was hatched at the infamous 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. The people of Alabama, acting through their elected representatives, not UN bureaucrats, have the sole authority to develop the state's environmental and development policies. The official synopsis of the law explains. Therefore, infringements of the property rights of citizens linked to, quote, any other international law or ancillary plan of action that contravenes the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of the state of Alabama are also prohibited under the new measure. Of course, as the law points out, the UN has enlisted a broad array of non-governmental, meaning tax-free, and intergovernmental, meaning taxpayer paid for, organizations in its effort to foist Agency 20 and Agenda 21 on the world. Most notably, there's a German-based group. Why does so much trouble come out of Germany? It comes out of trouble from the EU. The Germans just seem to have never gotten over it. They've never gotten the idea, have they? This group's called ICLEI, formerly known as the International Council of Local Environment Initiatives. I'm sure it's very local. Yeah, local to Nuremberg, Berlin, Hanover. But the new measure takes direct aim at the problem, too. Quote, the state of Alabama and all political subdivisions may not enter into any agreement, expend any sum of money, or receive funds contracting services or giving financial aid to or from such entities as defined in Agenda 21 documents. This bill that would bar the state from taking private property without due process is intended to shelter the people of Alabama from the United Nations Agenda 21, which is a sustainable development initiative, meaning an anti-human, pro-pet rock environment, an initiative that some conservatives and libertarians see as a precursor, one more precursor, for the creation of world government. Public support for the Alabama law was overwhelmingly bipartisan as citizens who had been terrorized by Agenda 21 linked schemes targeting their private property spoke out. But according to analysts and state Republican Party officials cited in press reports, the governor was originally hesitant to sign the bill, almost certainly due to concerns over loss of some federal funding. Well, states need to tell the federal government to take their federal money and put it where the sun doesn't shine. The U.S. Senate, of course, has never formally ratified Agenda 21. It's not a treaty. It's just a thing, probably signed by some president as an executive agreement to avoid the, Bill Clinton probably, to avoid the having to have 2/3 vote of the Senate. But this is, for almost 2 decades, been quietly attempting to impose a plan on Americans by stealth, using mostly deliberately deceptive terms like smart growth and green. Green really always means red, as in communist or your own blood. And proponents of the global scheme consistently threaten that states seeking to protect citizens from the UN plot could end up losing federal funds. Every time you take $1 of federal money, there's strings attached. This is great. Alabama is to be praised for this. And a bill similar to Alabama's is in the Arizona legislature, overwhelmingly approved by the state Senate, New Hampshire, etc. It's going across America, so some people are fighting back. Now we have to break for a word from our sponsors, but we'll be back in 3.5 minutes. Don't forget the truthandliesradio.com website. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. We'll be right back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. This probably doesn't come as a surprise to you, but most Americans see government as a threat to their rights and are looking forward to a bleak future. More than half of Americans, 51%, believe that the federal government is more of a threat to their rights than a protector of them, according to the latest Rasmussen poll. Only 34% of those polled in the May 29 and 30 telephone survey see the federal government more as a protector of rights, only a third. The poll showed that 53% of the Democrats see the federal government today as a protector of individual rights. Considering the components of the Democratic Party, I am not surprised. While slightly more than half of the Democrats, 53%, see the government as their protector, most Republicans, 2/3, 67%, and those not affiliated with either major political party, 52%, see the government as a threat to individual rights. 70% of those polled think a free market economy works better than the one managed by the government, and most believe that cutting government spending and deficits are good for the economy. The poll also indicated that older Americans are much more likely than younger Americans to consider the federal government a threat to individual rights, and that blacks are less likely to share the concern than whites and adults of other races. A new USA Today Gallup poll suggests Americans are growing increasingly dissatisfied with the next generation's prospects of doing a better job than their parents, and could be a sign of how Americans perceive Mr. Obama's job performance. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans are currently dissatisfied with the opportunity for the next generation of Americans to live better than their parents. Older Americans are particularly unhappy on this question, but on balance, the majority of young adults are negative as well. Now let's analyze these numbers for just a second. Only 53%, the Democratic Party is the left-wing party, okay? And still 47% see the federal government as a bad thing. The Republican Party, which has more conservatives and more libertarians, but still too damn many corporate socialists, has 2/3 not liking the government. And of people who are not party affiliated, more than half don't like it. More than 2/3 of the people, more than enough for, say that the free market works. But we don't have any of these things. We have a situation where the majority of the people in the United States are not getting the government and the kind of government that they say they want. And it's especially scary for younger people. And we have to ask why. Well, the answer to why, I can tell you, is that the system is broken. The Constitution of the United States, which I love, the great experiment, had flaws. And some of those flaws were inherent because they couldn't conceive of the lengths to which some people would go, I guess, to control lives. They couldn't conceive of the technology that could be used. But there was also added defects like the destruction of the balance of the Congress when originally state legislatures elected the Senate, which kept the federal government off the backs of the state legislatures. And then it came down to the two biggies. The two biggies are that, first of all, democracy is somehow by itself a moral good, when in fact America was not founded as a democracy, as opposed to freedom, which is a moral value and a moral good and a moral goal. And the second one was that everyone is equal, not what Thomas Jefferson wrote, that all men were created to be equal. And using those two things, people, the manipulators of the mobs, if you will, that the founding fathers were terribly afraid of, have bludgeoned America over a century. In fact, it took a war, Mr. Lincoln's war, to bludgeon 11 southern states into line with military occupation and war, what would be today considered war crimes that would make the things that the Serbians have been accused of in the war in Yugoslavia look like nothing. They have created a democratic majoritarian tyranny and have found ways to make people give up hope. People believe government won't change. The majority of older people are just, it's gotten worse little at a time. So they say, well, what can I do about it? What can one vote do about it? Well, one vote in the Continental Congress was the difference between America adopting German versus English as the official language. One vote in every precinct in the United States would have been the difference between John Kennedy winning and losing. One vote on the Supreme Court passed Roe v. Wade. One vote on the Supreme Court passed a whole lot of things. One votes have been important many, many times. I believe that Ronald Reagan was only elected because people over 16 years worked, protested, and in many respects threw their vote away. They were people like me. I only ever voted for a Republican or a Democrat for president. Well, only a Republican for president 2 times in my life. In 1980 and 1984, when I voted for Ronald Reagan. The rest of the time, I threw my vote away, I was told. I voted for the most right-wing libertarian candidate I could find that was credible. And millions of other Americans did that. And eventually that forced the Republican Party to the right. The problem was, when the Reagan Revolution got to Washington, they didn't throw out the people that were there. Too many of the Republican political class were kept. A lot of us blame it on Nancy Reagan, God bless her, because she's the one who was behind bringing George Bush onto the ticket and wanted Reagan to be a peace president and better thought of. And while I have great admiration for her loyalty to her husband, a great man as a wife, I think politically she did the nation great harm. And we are left now with an America that in one generation has gone from being the freest, greatest, most powerful, richest country in the world to a country that is tyrannical, that is capricious, that is hated, that is bankrupt, where we have a brain drain, where people are going to places like Singapore and even getting passports from Hong Kong, Special Administrative Region of Red China, because there's more economic freedom there than there is in the United States. America's brightest and best are leaving. Those of you who listen to this radio network are leaving or thinking about it. We are paying the price for what's happened, and we're going to continue to. Now we're at the bottom of the hour, which means we have to break for the news and a word from our sponsors. But I'll be back in 3 minutes, so please don't go away. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network.